Hello, and welcome to this month's Tech Talk. I'm Billy Talley, CEO of Teleconnect, and today we have a special guest, Chad Muckenfuss, a solutions engineer with Tallus with nearly 20 years experience in the MSP and telecommunications industry. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Billy. Pleasure to be here. Glad to join you today.
So today we are going to be discussing the 5 cybersecurity essentials that every law firm should implement. But before we get started, Chad, why should law firms be concerned about cybersecurity, and what does that threat landscape look like?
Well, Billy, that's a great question. I think the threat landscape differs by what type of law is being practiced at each firm, but all of the client's information, regardless of the area of practice, is really affected. So any of the law firms that practice in and around financial obviously have a fiduciary responsibility to protect that financial information that is very private to their clients. On the flip side, anybody that's practicing law in and around medical, their clients' medical records, and just general information around their clients, all of that can be impacted by either a data breach or not securing the information, or what's called data loss that we'll talk about throughout this conversation here today. So it's very, very important for any law firm at any level to really consider the implications if they were to have a data breach or some kind of happening around their data and client information.
Okay, well, let's get started. So, Chad, let's start with email security. Why is this so important for law firms?
Well, it's typically the primary way of communicating between businesses, or in this case, between lawyers and their clients. So a lot of information is handed back and forth or shared back and forth, and a majority of that flows through email. Now, one of the key ways that can be secured is using email encryption, where the only way that the information shared between the lawyer and the client is through an encryption key, and then a key on the receiving side to unlock that information. And it can only be seen by the individuals that possess the key to view that information. There's organizations out there that you and I work with on a daily basis that provide specifically email encryption. Companies like Zix, and I'm going to name a few, but Zix, Enable, Darktrace, and Proofpoint are 4 of the big players in that space, specific to the email side and the email encryption of personal data or personal information that's shared between a lawyer and their client. So again, it's key to focus on that because it's one of the primary ways of communication between lawyers and clients these days.
Can you give an example of how email security would prevent a breach?
So what it's doing is when email is sent, so for example, if I'm the lawyer and I type up an email to you, my client, I'm sending that information. It's traversing the public internet. It allows for someone to potentially intercept that, or for someone to log into the server and be able to take that information off of the server and find out what was in that email, whether it was actually information that was typed into the email itself in the body, or an attachment potentially of information that was being shared either from the lawyer or from the client. And what the encryption does is, again, eliminates that. So it can only be shared from the sending party and the receiving party, and then vice versa if there's an email sent back. It's a specific key only for that one email at that time, and can only be viewed and received by the parties involved in that encryption process.
Okay. So next up is multi-factor authentication. How does
Mhm.
that play a role in cybersecurity?
So I think the multi-factor authentication is interesting because that focuses more on the actual law firm's offices. And what that does is, law firms today are not just a traditional, you go into a fancy building that has wood walls and red leather couches and all that type of thing that we picture from the movies and television for law offices. A law office a lot of times is either shared space with other companies or organizations, or it can be a work from home situation for a lot of people these days. And what multi-factor authentication does is eliminates risk of being able for other people to know what the password is for one of the law firm's employees. So for example, it's not just the lawyers that work there, but it's also paralegals and office staff and other people that are working in that law firm that maybe, for example, go to a Starbucks and they sit down at the Starbucks and are doing some work. Someone can be looking at what their password is. Someone could be tracking what their password is on an open Wi-Fi connection at that Starbucks. For a multi-factor authentication, it's important to leverage that because it's not just Chad and his password to log in. It's also Chad, his password, and now a secondary verification, typically a text message. But there's other alternatives to that too. What we see happening in the industry today is not just the traditional, I'm logging in with a password and then it's requesting another answer key or PIN number from a text message that was sent to me. Those traditional ones are like Duo, NordLayer. Some of those are some of the ones that do that traditional style multi-factor authentication. What we see a lot of times now is biometrics being used in that to eliminate passwords altogether, which is unique in the industry now, and it's really taking off because not only does it do away specifically with passwords and PIN numbers, but it also eliminates the ability for ransomware to get into a network, into a law firm's network, and generate chaos in there and steal information because there are no more passwords. So when you go to a passwordless solution, and I know it sounds weird, but what it uses is just like our iPhones or our Android cell phones do, is it uses facial recognition. It also uses how I type on my laptop or desktop computer, the cadence in which I type, also uses the cameras like we're using now on our computers as well to look at facial recognition and those types of things. And if one or more of those is off, it will either lock down the computer completely, depending on what the situation is, or it will lock down certain applications that I can't get into until other authorizations are utilized to verify that it's actually me doing that work. So multi-factor authentication is one of the key things that we see in the industry really driving that end user communication.
So how should a law firm implement, or where should they start implementing multi-factor authentication?
I think it starts obviously with the lawyers themselves are probably the first ones to utilize it because they have access to all of the information typically in the law firm. So, and they're also the ones a lot of times that are going to different courtrooms or different meetings, logging into all different types of Wi-Fi. Some of it may be secured, some of it may just be open to the public. And leveraging a multi-factor authentication specifically to the key users starting there and then pushing it out to the rest of the office staff, I think is the best way to have it proliferate through the whole law firm. I mean, and that's the key, is getting everybody to utilize that so that you can eliminate as much risk as possible.
Okay. So let's talk about desktop security. What should law firms be focused on here?
So again, it kind of piggybacks off of what we just said with regard to the multi-factor authentication, meaning that we have to look at law firms just like any other, what used to be a typical office job. And it's interesting because that office job has now become a hybrid workforce or completely remote. So the example I used earlier in our conversation about going to a Starbucks or the lawyers working at different either meeting sites or courthouses or anything that has specific unsecured Wi-Fi, it's the same situation on their laptop or their tablet or even their phone. What they're going to have is a situation where they sit down and now they have opened up themselves and their clients potentially to a risk factor. It's on a different network. It may not be secure. Okay. So what endpoint detection and recovery and what endpoint protection specifically does is it will monitor that endpoint specifically for viruses, malware, all the traditional things. And a lot of times it is becoming more and more sophisticated to look if someone's trying to penetrate that specifically and find that that device on the Wi-Fi network and either hack into it will gather information based on keystrokes that the person is utilizing, what their passwords might be. The endpoint detection and recovery is really, really key. In addition to that, what it also does is if there is some kind of infection that is mistakenly clicked on in an email, it will remove that specific computer from the overall network or from the corporate network and lock it out until it can be resolved and wiped and reinstated back onto the network in a clean situation. So again, endpoint detection is really, really important. And then if we take that one step further into managed
Right.
detection, that is a service that not only looks at the individual's laptop, desktop, phones, etc., but what it also looks at is the overall network in an office. So it's going to monitor network switches that are handling the internet connectivity in the office, Wi-Fi access points, routers, VPN traffic, all that type of thing, and that's all monitored by a cybersecurity company and then reported back to the customer, in this case a law firm or a lawyer's office, to be able to say, hey, we've got an issue here, we took care of it, it's resolved, and here was a solution for it, because it's a fully managed solution around that cybersecurity aspect.
Okay. So what about let's move to backups and recovery.
Sure. So the key to backups and recovery is having the best data stored outside of the company's network, outside of the law office, outside of my laptop, having a clean backup to be able to go to when there is a disaster. And the key to that is being able to have a third party that is utilizing whatever software. In most cases, it's Microsoft 365. And what most law firms don't realize is that Microsoft 365, while it's cloud-based and utilizes their Azure platform, there are no backups on it. It is just what's called a retention policy. So in order to get a backup of your actual information, your Word documents, your Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, anything that you've shared in a Microsoft Teams, a SharePoint, a Word or Excel file, you actually have to back that up using a third party. And we utilize companies like Steel Dome, Sky Data Vault, and Datto to utilize and get those clean copies, so that if there is a disaster, what happens is that I can wipe my computer clean and install a clean copy prior to that data breach or prior to that incident, and pick right back up where I left off with minimal impact to day to day. It can happen very, very quickly, wipe it clean and move on, and you eliminate most of the risk for ransomware, viruses, and the impacts that they have on potentially on a customer or client's network.
So you mentioned Office 365, like OneDrive. So all the cloud applications as well need to be backed up as
Yes.
well, not just the desktop applications.
If that's one thing that I can instill in anybody that's viewing this podcast, is Microsoft does not back up their products. It is just a retention policy. So it is key for businesses of all types. And I know we're talking about law firms today, but of any businesses that use 365, look into a backup and disaster recovery plan using a third-party company to be able to do that for you. There's plenty of them out there, and Billy, I know you can direct them to find the right one that fits their needs for sure.
Okay. All right. So finally, let's discuss mobility and why is it an essential aspect of cybersecurity?
So I think mobility is interesting because what happens these days, again, post-COVID, we have a lot of remote workers. And what do those remote workers bring to the table? Their cell phone. They want to use their
Yes.
own cell phone. And within the industry, we call that bring your own device, or BYOD, which is great because now that law firm doesn't have to pay for a phone or a plan for that phone typically or anything like that. But what it does is it introduces risk from a cyber security standpoint back into the network. That person's phone, that employee's phone, now has access to company email, documents that are shared and downloaded, all kinds of different potential risks that are out there for clients' information to get out of control of that law firm specifically. So what we do is we recommend a mobile device management, and what that does is it comes in and protects specifically the company information, not the employee's personal information. So again, I'm going to use the example of a lawyer goes to a courthouse. They may not take their laptop inside, but 9 times out of 10, they're going to have their phone with them. So they have their phone, they pull up information, they're looking at something. That phone is typically on Wi-Fi. And again, you open yourself up when that phone is on Wi-Fi for people to potentially get into that phone, pull down that information, and do that. And gather the proprietary or private information from all the client files that may or may not be on that phone. So what we try to do is eliminate that. So there are mobile device management softwares like Mass 360 and some other ones that are available through plenty of different vendors out there that can help manage just the corporate or company information that's on that person's phone. So if the phone gets lost or left somewhere, that can be remotely wiped and does not affect anything from the personal side. Same thing if that employee chooses to move on to a different law firm, all of that company information can be wiped off of that phone to keep control of it, and that person can move on with their own phone and private information.
Okay. So are there any best practices for securing a mobile device?
Some of the best practices are having a written policy within that law firm, even if it's a small firm, to say you're welcome to bring your own device to us and utilize that for accessing work information, but you need to understand that by signing off on this, and we all know lawyers love contracts, so signing off on this contract saying that we're going to load this piece of software onto your phone that affects only the company information, and you're agreeing for us to manage that. I think it's key to have a written policy for that, and it's not just presented to the employee. And it also eliminates it being overlooked. It's very easy to just say, oh, it's their phone, I don't need to worry about it. And that's a mistake too, because it has all of your company's information on it now that is shared with that employee. So again, written policy, follow through with a specific procedure for that.
Hey, I'd like to open it up, see if we have any questions from the audience. How can I protect my client's info and know that if something bad happens like ransomware, I can get that data back?
That's a great question. And again, it goes back to what we talked about, having that backup, that secure backup and disaster recovery plan in place. So having a third-party cloud backup solution for all of the client's information and for all the company's information is key to be able to bring that information back and start back with a clean copy once ransomware has been discovered on the net.
Okay. Check and see if we have any more questions. So while we're waiting, do you have any actionable takeaways that law firms could do today to get started securing their firm?
Well, I think one of the things is look at what you have. Out of the 5 things that we've discussed today, use that as a checklist and say, what do we have in place right now? Do we have any type of email encryption? Are we using a service for email, or are we just reliant again on Microsoft 365 and Outlook to have that information? Do I have to do multi-factor authentication? Am I being prompted as a law firm owner or a lawyer or anything like that by a secondary check of, is it really me that's logging into my key software or my client's information each time? Again, endpoint detection and recovery is key to protecting the information that I store on my specific laptop or desktop, phone or tablet. The backup, again, do we have a backup? Where is that backup held? Or are we just relying on the data storage that doesn't exist on Microsoft that we thought it did? All those types of things are key. And everybody that's bringing their phone to the table, I'm starting as a new employee. I'm bringing my phone in. How am I protecting the company, or how is the company protecting their information? More importantly, that I'm going to now access on my personal device.
So that brings up another question when we talk about email. We talk about email encryption. What about the Office 365 account or the Gmail account? Is there a way to protect that account from someone, hacking into that account and using it to send out emails acting as you?
Sure. So phishing is a big thing, and we've probably most people have heard of that. It's phishing spelled with a PH, and what that is an email that comes in that looks and feels like a company email, an internal company email potentially, or an external email from an Amazon or an eBay or something that you
Right.
typically use on a regular basis. And so hackers will use that information to get in to your email, allow you to click on that email to check an invoice or a shipping information, or it may look like the owner's email address, but there's one letter off, or it's .org instead of .com, something that is a little bit off, but not enough for you to really notice. What it comes down to help eliminate a lot of that is really just training the employees specifically on knowing what to click on. And if there is a question, don't just click on the email. Ask the question. You know the person, you know the owner of the law firm, ask them or ask their paralegal, hey, did so and so send me this email? It looks a little strange to me why they would be asking me to purchase gift cards somewhere, or why they were asking me
Right.
to send me their phone number so that I could text them. If it looks off, trust your gut and make sure that you don't click on it and open it, and set it aside and then ask that individual. That's the first stage. But the biggest key to that is training everybody internally in that organization. Again, whether it's a law firm or another company, there's specific training that can be done on a monthly basis or quarterly basis to help people realize, oh, I shouldn't click on that email. This is what's happening out there, and here's some of the typical things that would expose my email account to being hacked.
Okay. Do you have any final thoughts before we?
I think the final thoughts are, don't be afraid of the conversation. There's a
Yeah.
lot that can be done. It doesn't all need to happen at one time. And if anything, remember that you need a good clean backup to work from. So, in the old days, it used to be tape drives and all that type of thing. Now it's a cloud backup. It's very cost effective to do. And again, I leave the biggest thing on the table is, don't be afraid to ask questions. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot out there to help you secure your networks. Again, whether it's a law firm or any other type of company, there's a lot to do that can be a step-by-step process. And people like you, Billy, are here to help those individuals through that process.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chad, for sharing your insights today. For our viewers, if you want to learn more or to discuss your firm's cybersecurity needs, click on the link in the comments or in the show notes to schedule a meeting. We can get you on a phone call with Chad or get you connected to one of our cybersecurity or MSP partners. That's it for today's episode. Thank you for viewing, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.